Roger, Challenger, that's super.
Houston, you can tell America that Challenger is at Taurus Littrow.
And on our television screens, for all those journeys, as the technology got very much better in a very short period of time, we saw live views of the moon. Pans of landscapes like this, pans that became so familiar that you can't turn on a commercial or see an historical clip or even watch late night television without seeing some frame that was taken during the Apollo missions to and from the moon. It has given us the impression that we know the moon like the back of our hand. It turns out that is only an impression. Because what we have now been looking at are photographs, data returned from several different types of missions over several different years, from 1966 through 1972. The Surveyor, the Lunar Orbiter, and the Apollo missions. And on each of these separate technologies, with different lighting, different geometry, different technologies themselves, we have found and corroborated what we're going to show you in the next few hours. We have found, apparently, the real moon, the moon that perhaps only a few inside NASA have ever really seen. Have you ever wondered why in almost, in fact it is a quarter of a century this week since Apollo 10 went to the moon, we haven't been back? Have you wondered why the only return mission in all that time was a military mission lofted a few months ago by the Pentagon? And why you've heard almost nothing about it? Hopefully what I'm going to show you this evening will put some new perspective on those questions. This is the plaque that was left on the landing legs of the lunar module Challenger to companion with Neil Armstrong's plaque. And then from the rover camera, the lunar module ignited, rose into the black sky, and the last men in the Apollo missions to visit the moon came home. Behind them, on the surface, scattered at places like Hadley Rill, Frau Morrow, Tranquility Base, Taurus Littrow, there were debris, technology, bits and pieces, trinkets left by the brief human exploration that was Apollo. Rovers, backpacks, antennae, trash bags, all the debris that humans have developed on our own world brought fleetingly to the surface of another world 250,000 miles away to remain for millions of years until it is degraded. Oh yes, and it must not be forgot that we've left one more thing: 6 flags. The flag of the nation which accomplished this extraordinary miracle sent 12 men where no one had gone ever before in all of recorded or unrecorded time, brought them all safely home, and then stayed home. It is so close and yet so far. It's 240,000 miles away, orbits roughly once every month, turns the same side toward the Earth all the time, so there's an Earth side and a far side, and we see roughly 60% of the moon, and the other 40% remains dark, never to be seen by the eyes of earthbound man or woman. In the late 1950s, 1958 to be exact, we, as a government, politically put together, under the leadership of President Eisenhower, a very unique agency in the history of the federal government, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. This is part of the NASA Charter, which, among other things, mandates that the widest appropriate dissemination of the data gathered by NASA's activities be presented to the American people and through them to the rest of the world. This was an extraordinary achievement for government in the late 50s. Because if you remember what was going on, if you remember from reading the history text, what you will note is that there was intense inter-service rivalry between the military services, Army, Navy, Marines, for who was going to control and be lead agency in the new fledgling ocean of space. It took a military man, President Eisenhower, to decide very wisely that instead of giving space to the Pentagon, space should be reserved to the civilian side. Space should be reserved to the citizens of the United States themselves. And that everything that was done under the aegis of this new civilian space agency should be open, above board, and freely available to one and all. On behalf of that charter, NASA has established, early on, a series of archives around the country. The most prominent archive, where we have now been able to obtain the photographs you're going to see in a few minutes, is the National Space Science Data Center located just outside Washington, D.C. What I'm going to show are images that we have secured through the National Space Science Data Center. We have analyzed, we have subjected to intensive computer image processing techniques and technology that literally was unavailable almost anywhere when these photographs were acquired over a quarter of a century ago. And these photographs are available to you. What I'm going to do is to give out the frame numbers so that you and others that may be hearing or seeing this will be able to go to either that archive or other NASA archives and extract the same data and make the crucial, pivotal comparisons to verify what we believe we found. There is a problem, however, because as a backdrop, behind the scenes, as those fine words were being written and the charter of NASA was being signed, there was a document, there was a study commissioned by NASA of a group of prestigious Americans from all walks of life: academia, politics, law, economics, etc. It is called Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. It was prepared by the Brookings Institution in Washington as a report to NASA and subsequently was communicated on April 18, 1961 by NASA to the U.S. Congress Committee on Science and Astronautics of the House of Representatives of the 87th Congress First Session. It is also available in every federal archive, of which there are many. We found this copy in, kind of ironically, Little Rock, Arkansas. What's important about the Brookings report, as we term it, is what you read on page 215. Because on page 215, there is the beginnings of an interesting discussion titled Implications of a Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life. Now keep in mind that NASA had literally been born, breath breathed into it by an act of Congress in July of '58, as an agency designed to be the most wide open and accessible in the history of the United States. In this study, where people of the caliber of Margaret Mead, the president of MIT, the Legal Affairs Council for the UN, on and on and on, prestigious men and women, one and all, who met over a period of a year and considered every possible impact of NASA's activities on human affairs, ranging from sociological to economic to geopolitical. On page 215, the document says, and I quote, "Artifacts left at some point in time by these life forms," meaning life forms to be found somewhere in the solar system, "might possibly be discovered through our space activities on the Moon, Mars, or Venus." Forecasting ahead 10, 20, 30 years, it was considered absolutely the norm then to expect that maybe, just maybe, as part of its ongoing activities, sending unmanned robotic probes throughout the solar system, which was NASA's plan then, subsequently carried out brilliantly, successfully, in what has now been termed the golden age of planetary exploration, that some of those probes might, in fact, one day trip over an artifact left by someone else. The document then goes on at the bottom of this page to discuss what might happen.